Lisa, good day.
Good evening, Eddie.
Who's moderating today?
Mariam and Adeshola.
Okay, I would like to read Mr. Levin's bio. I'll be here for it.
All right, okay.
You.
I think he's in class too.
I'd like to read his bio. Thank you. Hello, Lisa. Are you there?
Yes, Edie, I
Lisa.
am.
Okay, Lisa, at exactly 5 o'clock, take attendance of everybody that is in the class at 5 exactly and
All right.
give all of them plus one attendance.
All right, Edie. Noted. Mr. Ibiang is in class.
Yeah, I know. And if anybody announces this on a group, just give everybody that. Thank you.
All right, Edie.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to class. It promises to be another good lecture today. But before we start, we're 53 in class. Let's do well to inform our colleagues to join the call so that we can start. So in the next 5 minutes, we are going to start. So do well to inform your party members. Thank you very much. All right, that's 5:05. We're going to commence the class now. But before we do that, I would like to take the citation of our facilitator for today. Miss
Miriam,
Lizzie.
Miriam,
Yes.
I'll be taking that citation. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
So, I hope everyone can hear me. Good evening, everyone. 18th cohort.
Good evening.
It's my singular honor to read the citation of my big brother. One of the reasons there is Kundilawa. His name, of course, is Livinus Ibiang. And right now, he's currently a public health and biosafety expert and a professional in politics with over 19 years working in the social sector to strengthen institutional reforms that have led to social change. He has led several student and youth movements and has been involved in human rights advocacy. He was a one-time former FCT interim chairman of Alliance for New Nigeria Party, ANN, and it was under his leadership that the party built the structures at the local government and the ward levels, which also was instrumental in my campaign for the Senate seat in 2019. Before his ascension to the office of National Vice Chairman of the party for the South Zone after the National Convention in 2018. In this capacity, he served in several committees, prominent amongst which is the Security Committee, which he chaired, the Partnership Committee with other parties for the general elections in 2019. He was also a member of the National Campaign Council of the party and served as the South-South Zonal Director and Chairman of the National Campaign. Ibiang is a graduate of the University of Calabar and holds several certifications in his chosen field. He holds, in addition, a master's in business administration from the greatest university in Nigeria, who is naturally ahead of everybody else, the Ahmadu Bello University, and is also currently a PhD candidate in international public health. He's somebody I'm proud to call my friend, my big brother, and someone who has always been a point in which I could advise or I could receive advice or turn to. Mr. Ibiang is an epitome of justice, clarity. He has supported things I've done wholeheartedly without even asking me questions. It's my singular privilege to welcome Mr. Livinus Ibiang, my big brother, today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our ED, our big boss, my dear brother and friend. Thanks for that intro, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to share something with you later, and I'll send that to you. I was unpacking things at my place, and I found something. And when I looked at it, and I smiled, because it has to do with you. So I'll send that to you later.
I look forward to seeing this.
I'm sure you like it.
I'm sure I will. This is probably a blast from the past, and I would love to see it.
It's a relic. I kept it somewhere. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to this very class. It's my singular honor and privilege to be part of you and to also share some experience and some of my readings and learnings in the past years and to date, because we never stop learning, and because we are interested in the enclave called Nigeria, we must continue to learn Nigeria, continue to speak Nigeria, and continue to also work for Nigeria. I know a couple of times we say to ourselves, Nigeria is not worth dying for. Especially when we look at the handiwork of some mischief makers and some of the very terrible persons that we have in offices. We say to ourselves, Nigeria is not worth dying for, but the truth is, we live in Nigeria, we work in Nigeria, we study here in Nigeria. If that tells you anything, it means that we have a lot of work to do to make the place a better place for all of us. And that's why today we are here at the Electoral College to understand our history and understand how our laws came to be what it is today, how we came by the kind of representation that we have in governance. Having said that, I just want to share with us that Nigerians' constitutional development has been a very, very, very complex process, which is marked by several transitions between colonial rule, military regimes, and attempts at establishing what we all project should be a stable democratic system. The country's constitutional history can be broadly divided. I'm just sharing this as an intro. So our constitutional history can be broadly divided into what we call the pre-independence and post-independence periods, with the latter, that is the pre-independence period, experiencing significant shifts due to, the post-independence period, experiencing what we called significant shifts due to political instability and military interventions that has taken place from 1966 up to the time that the military exited from office. And if you look at the pre-independence period, which of course spans between 1940 to 1960, we had British colonial influences. Of course, that marked the point at which Nigeria's constitutional development began under the British colonial rule with the amalgamation of Northern and Southern Protectorate in 1914. That is some history that every one of us knows too well, like the back of our hands. And then we had the gradual constitutional changes. Now, these gradual constitutional changes is what defines the constitutional development process. I needed to give the background so that you understand where we're coming from. Now, having laid that background sufficiently, we'd then like to look at my presentation, and which of course will be given in the format as you can see on the screen. The introduction, which of course I've talked a little bit about, but we're still there further. Then the pre-independence, which I've mentioned, the post-independence constitutions, and we'll look at all of that. We'll also look at the military rule, even though we may not discuss in details what happened those periods, but we just mentioned them. And then the return to democracy and the current constitution that we are currently running with. And then the constitutional attempt at constitutional amendment and reforms, and then we will conclude with perhaps some recommendation. Now, it's important to know that constitution, which we consider the fundamental legal document, clearly outlines the basic principles and laws governing a country or organization. So every organization must have a constitution to guide it as a legal document. Here are some definitions of what a constitution is. And I want to quote two scholars who have done very significant work in these areas. One is Oyederon, who posits that not only that the constitution is descriptive of all the allocation of powers between levels of government and various positions and responsibilities, it is also legalistic in nature. This is what Oyederon had to say about what the Constitution is. Now, Professor Ben Wabweze, a very popular constitutional legal mind, had this to say. He said that the Constitution is an act of the people if it is made by them, either directly in a referendum or through a convention or constituent assembly, popularly elected. This is how Ben Wabweze defined our constitution. I'm sure from this definition, you can understand why a lot of Nigerians believe that we do not have a people's constitution. In their opinion, what we call a constitution was not written by the people, because the opening paragraph of a constitution, if you look at part 1 of our constitution, the 1999 constitution, as amended as they call it, if you look at chapter 1, what it says in the opening is that we the people, having resolved, solemnly give to ourselves. I'm just paraphrasing. Okay, but so a lot of people believe that the constitution that we currently have was midwifed by the military regime and handed over to Nigerians. So that cannot be said to be a people's constitution, because it doesn't articulate the aspirations and wishes of the Nigerian people, and hence the call for a constitution that is people-centric in nature. Now, the Constitution is the ground norm and serves as the supreme law of the land. Why? Because it sets forth the framework of government, which has to do with the structure first, here establishing the arms, the organization, branches, powers, and responsibilities. Please, just a second. Sincere apologies, please. So it sets forth the framework of government in terms of structure, and then in terms of function, for example, the lawmaking process, implementation, enforcement, and interpretation. These make up the framework. Then it also prescribes the principles of governance. For instance, how shall we be governed? Nigeria wants to be governed by the law. That's talking about the rule of law. And then, of course, as Baron Montesquieu had propounded in his theory, the separation of powers. And this, of course, lays out how the branches and arms of government shall actually function. Then it also sets out the rights and freedom, which deals, of course, with the fundamental rights of citizens. For instance, it protects individual liberties and rights such as freedom, rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom to practice any religion of our choice. And then it talks about equality before the law and guarantees equal treatment for anybody, irrespective of gender, ethnic origin, religion, and political affiliation. So, and then it establishes the amendment procedures. For example, it sets forth procedure for its amendment. So every constitution, whether as a country or association, must establish the procedure for its amendment. And then, of course, you have what we call the supremacy of the Constitution as contained in Chapter 1 and Part 1 of the Constitution, where it defines the Constitution as the highest legal authority. So those are some introductory background that are very critical for us to have at the back of our mind, so that as we walk through our historical, the history of our constitutional development process, we must also understand that these provisions are clearly enshrined in our Constitution. Now, the pre-independence Nigeria that we talked about featured 5 constitutions that were adopted at different periods of our historical evolution. One, in 1886, for instance, we had the charter granted the Royal Niger Company, that is RNC, to administer the protected territories in northern Nigeria. And as we go through these processes, this evolution, I'd like for us to note the terminologies that were used at the time. For instance, here we talked about charter, and then we're talking about Royal Niger Company, and then we talked about protected territories in northern Nigeria. And then in 1899, we had the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria established at the time, following a revised Charter. And then we have what we call the Oil River Protectorate, which was established in 1893 and later changed to the Niger Coast Protectorate. Again, we'll touch this as we proceed in the course of this presentation. Then in 1900, we had the Southern Protectorate proclaimed by the British colonial masters. In 1906, marked the first attempt to build a nation when the colony of Lagos and the protectorate of southern Nigeria were amalgamated into a protectorate of southern Nigeria. So we no longer had the colony of Lagos standing alone. We had, and don't forget, we had the Oil River Protectorate, we have the colony of Lagos, and so all of those colonies were fused together to have what we call the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. Now, in 1912, Sir Frederick Lugard returned as the Governor General of both the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. And in 1914, he went further to amalgamate Nigeria. And we had, by the amalgamation, bringing together the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and Southern Nigeria to form the Protectorate of Nigeria. So Nigeria became one. Now, so these are some of the major developments of the pre-independence era. We had, we have, as some scholars, had indicated, the Sir Frederick Lugard Constitution of 1914. So don't forget, we had a charter, and then subsequently, following the amalgamation of Nigeria, we had the what Lugard had put together as a framework for the governance of the country, which of course some scholars had referred to as the Lugard Constitution. And what were the provisions? So just understand that the constitutional developments were marked by changes in the constitution. That's what actually defined the different periods, and we are going to see that. So the provisions in the Lugard Constitution indicate as follows. One, it provided opportunity for the expression of public opinion through a non-legislative Nigerian council, but an advisory one. So what was in existence at the time was a Nigerian council, and it was purely advisory in nature. And that's why they said it is non-legislative, so it doesn't have legislative power. The powers were vested in the Governor General, who is both the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, because he makes laws for the governance of the protectorates of Nigeria at the time. Only matters of interest during the previous year, and explained any questions of policy and legislation. That is to say, the council only sit down basically to discuss certain matters of interest, and perhaps to provide an opportunity to explain to the council, okay, any questions on matters of policy or legislation. Like I said, it was a colonial rule, so the Governor General basically conveys the rules of the colonial, the British Empire to the Nigerian people. So because it has created an advisory council, it kind of provided some sort of, quasi-obligatory responsibility to provide those explanations to the council. The Nigerian council at the time consisted of 36 members, and this is how they were distributed. 6 Nigerians nominated to represent the coastal districts and the interior of the country. Then these 6 Nigerians consisted of 2 emirs from the north, the Alafin of Oyo, and 1 member each from Lagos and Calabar. Lagos and Calabar were originally colonies of their own before they were fused. Okay, and then we had the Benin Warren area. This was how these 6 persons were nominated. And Lord Lugard's term in office ended, and we had Sir Hall Clifford, who assumed office as the new Governor General. So note the provisions of that constitution at the time. Now, Sir Clifford, as we know in history, we usually refer to his time when he was in office and the following some of the initiatives that he brought on board in terms of enriching what was regarded as the constitution at the time, popularly referred to as the Clifford Constitution. So it was Clifford's innovations or additions to the constitution that gives that title as Clifford's Constitution. And this, of course, was in 1922. So what were the key features of the Clifford Constitution? One, the Clifford Constitution established the first formal constitution in Nigeria. So some historians, some academics considered what Lugard had as a constitution. And this was basically not to throw away the fact that there were some things that happened at the time. But others also feel that the main constitutional process actually began under Sir Clifford. But as you can see, Lugard had something, Clifford had something. And so let's look at what Clifford had. So the first formal constitution was established under Sir Clifford. Two, created a legislative council with limited representation. Only educated elites could vote. Three, he aimed to address colonial governance but lacked broad political participation. The new council legislated for the whole of southern Nigeria, but the council could debate the estimates of the whole country. This was, of course, as noted by Elua Ukagu, and of course, the North was still, however, governed by Governors General proclamation. This, of course, is as noted by Chukwu and Wabani. So basically what they're trying to say, you have a legislative council that makes legislations or propose legislations for the southern part of the country. But for the northern part of the country, the Governor General makes the laws for the northern part of the country. However, estimates, that's talking about budget, is usually discussed for the general country. I hope you are noting some of the things that we're talking about. Governor General making laws for the northern part of the country, the council legislating for the southern part of the country, but in terms of budgetary estimates, this is usually discussed at the Legislative Council. So you could see there is a shift in the constitutional elements as we have here. And it provided for a total membership of 45. So you see the membership was further expanded under Sir Clifford, consisting of 26 official members and 15 nominated members. According to Oyele, for the first time in Nigeria, Lagos and Calabar were granted the right to vote in an election to the Legislative Council. Now, if you cast your mind back to when we looked at political parties and structure, we talked about franchise granted to only Lagos and Calabar, and this was the reason. It was a provision of the law at the time based on this constitutional provision that made it so that only Lagos and Calabar were the two regions where voting could actually take place. 3 seats were allotted to Lagos and 1 seat was allotted to Calabar. So apart from Lagos, it shows the status of Calabar as an intellectual center at the time. It should be noted also that Calabar was the capital of the Oil River Protectorate created by the British in 1891 and was later renamed in 1893 as the Niger Coast Protectorate. Recall when I was giving the timeline earlier, I talked about that. And then we had the Richardson Constitution, which of course was established under Sir Otto Richards in 1946. Now, what were the key provisions of the Richardson Constitution? One, it established the executive and the legislative councils and expanded representation in governance. So there's an executive council and there's also a legislative council, which wasn't the case in both the Lugard and Sir Hall Clifford's constitution. Now, recognizing Nigeria's diverse ethnic groups. So note this, it was under Richardson that the diverse ethnic groups in Nigeria were actually recognized. So it became an issue of concern to actually look at minority issues. So created 3 regions. One, North, created the South and Eastern region, with each region having its regional council, which were largely hamstrung as the laws for the regions were centrally made by the National Legislative Council sitting in Lagos. This is quite interesting. So Richardson constitutions recognize the vast ethnic groups in the country and went on to create North, South, East regions of the country with regional legislative council. However, these regional legislative council were, linked to the National Legislative Council, which is central. So basically, to say that, yes, it expanded representation in governance, okay, so that the different regions could have an opportunity to co-opt and bring in more people into governance, but then legislations were made centrally. So thus, the regional councils were not granted full legislative status or power. So that's basically what it is. And then set the stage for increased political engagement and regional autonomy. So this, of course, was widely criticized for lack of consultation. And of course, what do you expect? It was a colonial rule. So the governor general can, wake up one morning and decide what he wants to do. But then at this time, Nigerians were becoming conscious at the time because we have a very strong youth movement. Okay, we have some of those our elites who are well educated, well exposed, and who are beginning to question why certain things should be. And so there was wide criticisms and of those provisions because there were no consultations. Now, what follows was the establishment of the 1951 Constitution under Sir John Mafason, what we popularly call the Mafason Constitution of 1951. Now, let us see what Mafason did during his time. So, what we call the Order in Council, 1172 of 1951 was established, was of course laid provision rather for the establishment of a central legislature made up of single chamber called the House of Representatives. Now, the regional houses represented by 136 members. And then there was an executive council consisting of the chief commissioners of each of the 3 regions, the Attorney General, Financial Secretary, Director Medical Services, Director Education, and others nominated by the governor. Now, the Mafason Constitution also approved bicameral legislature for the Western region of Nigeria and the Northern region. So through the Order in Council in 1951. And for the first time, Nigerians were made ministers, but without portfolio. I'm sure you've ever heard of a minister without portfolio. So you can be a minister of the Federation or minister of the Federation of Nigeria, but without a portfolio. So the portfolios are usually whether it is power or health or education or solid minerals or whatever. So these are portfolios. But you could be made a minister without a portfolio. So, but then what that means is that you have representation in government and the executive council. and then provided for the establishing more political parties like the Action Group and the Northern People's Congress. So remember when we talked about political parties and structure, we gave a brief background of how the Action Group was established and of course the NPC, and how, some of the alliances that took place happened. And those alliances could only take place because these parties were in existence. So, but then there were shortcomings of the Maffasin constitution, and one is the fact that this constitution did not last long, and two, Northern delegates in the Central Legislative Council refused to support the motion moved by Chief Anthony Inahoro of the Action Group in 1953 that Nigeria should be self-governing. So it's important for us to know historically that there was a motion. Nigeria did not just happen to become an independent nation in 1960. No, there were attempts. The first attempt was in 1953 when Anthony Inahoro moved that motion, but was largely opposed by, the Northern delegates in the Central Legislative Council. While the members in the South saw it as an eventful and historic, the Northern members saw it as an attempt by the South to set in motion some sort of political hegemony, which they fear may, kind of lord over them, which is not something that they were willing to go with. And so the Sardauna at the time, Ahmadu Bello, added to the motion as soon as it's practicable at the time. So these were some of the shortcomings. So there was a rejection for self-governance and the attempt to, of course, get Nigeria to become an independent country, and of course the opposition to that motion. So these were some of the things that made, and of course the fact that that constitution did not last, as we can see. So, but you could see that was 1951, and by 1954 we had the Littleton Constitution. Of course, this was under Sir Oliver Littleton in 1954. So Maffasin only was there in 3 years, and like we said, it was short-lived. So, but under the Littleton Constitution, what happened? So it was a product of public resentment and protestations that gave birth to what we call the Littleton Constitution. So basically, the people protested against the Maffasin Constitution, which was the reason why it didn't last, despite some of the sweeping innovations that were brought into that constitution. And so the Littleton Constitution was bettered as a product of the protestations against the Maffasin Constitution. And what happened is that there were 2 constitutional conferences which took place at the time following that protestation. One basically was the one held in London, and the second one in Lagos, both under the auspices of the British Secretary of Colonies at the time. So Nigeria became a federation comprising 5 units made up of the northern, eastern, western regions, the Federal Territory of Lagos, and then, of course, the Southern Cameroons. Don't forget, the Southern Cameroons used to be under Nigeria. That was why when we were talking about political parties and structure, we talked about the NCNC, which was founded by Sir Herbert Macaulay, Nigerian National Council of Nigeria and Cameroons, because the Southern Cameroon was under Nigeria, was in Nigeria at the time. And then the establishment of the Federal House of Representatives with 188 members that were mostly to be directly elected by the electorate. So this, of course, provided for that, 188 members to be elected. Then the creation of the Federal Council of Ministers, so what you call today Federal Executive Council, which members are to be selected from amongst the members of the Federal House of Representatives. What does this tell you? It's more or less like a parliamentary system, because you have the cabinet members selected from amongst the elected representatives of Nigeria. And then, of course, the allocation of legislative powers to the two tiers of government at the federal and regional levels in very clear terms through the exclusive, concurrent, and residual legislative list. Even in our constitution as we have today, we know that these three schedules clearly exist, detailing how powers are allocated between the federal states and the federal and states, rather. So this constitution, according to M.Y. Zachary, created a parliamentary system of government for the country. Like I said, in a parliamentary system, cabinet members are selected from amongst the elected representatives of the people. So that's what the Littleton Constitution established in 1954. But then there was another conference that took place in 1957. And I would say two major constitutional conferences which held in London. The first constitutional conference held in London between May 23 to June 26 of 1957. And major issues discussed were around creation of states like the Midwest state, Cross River state, and of course the Middle Belt states. And this was in addition to the others that were created earlier. So like the Western and Northern regions, the Eastern region also got a bicameral legislature at the conference. So there was a bicameral legislature for the Eastern region. It was also agreed that the office of the Prime Minister for the Federation be created. This was, of course, were discussed at the 1957 conference, and that the Eastern and Western region become self-governing immediately after the conference, while the Northern region becomes self-governing in 1959. So as at 1957, the Eastern and Western region became self-governing, and that's why you had the Northern region was to become self-governing in 1959. Now, there was again the 1958 conference. So there were you could see what the people protested was actually coming to light. There was wide consultations. Those consultations were the basis for all of these conferences that were taking place. From 1957, you had two conferences in Lagos, in London. And then in 1958, we had another constitutional conference which held between September 29 to October 27 in 1958 in London. And the key issues that were discussed in that constitutional conference were recommendations for the minorities commissions. This commission, of course, was set up by the 1957 conference to look at the minority issues. Because you see, Nigeria, even till today, we have minority ethnic groups. And you can see that most times when decisions are made, the minority ethnic groups are usually not, brought into the picture. So these various colonial regimes recognizes, and you could see from when we talked about Richardson, we talked about the recognition. In fact, from Clifford talked about the recognition of minority, groups. So all of those protestations that again followed the Masterson Constitution had opened the political space for bigger consultations that had taken place between 1957 and 1958. And at 1958, a commission had been set up to look at the minority issues. And of course, by 1957 rather, and by 1958, they had to revisit the minority issues. So to address the fears of the minority by the majority ethnic groups like the Igbos, Hausa, and Yoruba. Two, the issue of self-government for the northern Nigeria was also discussed. Don't forget, in 1957, it was actually mentioned that the northern Nigeria will become self-governing by 1959. So to set the groundwork for that, the issue came up again in the 1958 conference. So nothing was left off the table. Everything was brought to the table to ensure that the wishes and aspirations of the people are properly articulated. And don't forget, I did mention earlier that the process for drafting a constitution was supposed to be done by the people, which is why the opening paragraph of the Constitution is usually "we the people," as opposed to what we have today, where the military actually drafted and gave us the Constitution that we have today, which of course is the reason why a lot of people have widely criticized the Constitution that we have today. So the Constituent Assembly is usually the basis, the inclusive platform for generating or drafting a people-centered constitution. And these constitutional conferences that were happening provided that opportunity to articulate all of the issues, the wishes, and the aspirations of the people. And that is the reason why the minority issues actually surfaced in the conferences that took place in both London and Lagos. And then the request for independence, which Nigerian delegates had made to the United Kingdom government at the 1957 conference, was also put on the table. And then conference was attended by 106 persons, variously classified as delegates, advisors, and officials. And the conference recorded decisions on fundamental human rights, the police, self-government for the northern Nigeria, the position of Lagos. Of course, you remember Lagos was the federal capital territory, was the federal capital territory at the time. And then the southern Cameroons, electoral arrangements, fiscal arrangements, the minorities' problems were also discussed, and of course, Nigeria's independence. One of the major highlights was when the colonial secretary, in the person of Alan Lennox Boyd, who presided over the conference, declared the promise by Her Majesty's government of granting independence to Nigeria on October 1. And you see, we've always celebrated every 1st October, Nigerians' Independence Day. So that news was brokered to the delegates at that conference. Now, you can picture the mood, the atmosphere of the delegates when this news was, conveyed to them, assuming you were the ones in this cohort who went for that conference. What would be the mood? I leave you to imagine what that was at the time. And then we had the Independence Constitution of 1960. So although there were two major constitutional conferences that preceded this constitution, it retains some trappings of a colonial document. And we'll look at the key highlights, which of course are as follows. One, the constitution created three regions of the North, East, and West, along with the Federal Territory of Lagos. The Constitution appointed Her Majesty the Queen of England as the head of the executive, judiciary, as well as being a member of parliament. So that is where the parliamentary system, so it was still in existence even as at 1960. It also established two chambers of the federal legislature, the Senate and the House of Representatives. It set forth Nigeria's transition to self-governance and independence from British colonial rule and as a republic. Nigeria did not become a republic in 1960. It just set forth. So mark the language, it set forth. Now, it recognized fundamental human rights and freedoms. The office of the Prime Minister, who was to be appointed by the Governor General representing Her Majesty the Queen in the Federation, was also created by the Constitution. The Nigerian Police Force was also created by the Constitution. And then the Constitution also shared powers between the federal government and the regions in well-defined terms. These were some key highlights of the 1960 Constitution. Now, let's move on to see what happened. So, Nigeria became independent in 1960. The manner in which Nigeria was governed is clearly defined in the 1960 Constitution. And then in 1963, Nigeria became a republic. And what was contained in the Republican Constitution that Nigeria had? The key provisions were as follows. One, the establishment of the Republic of Nigeria. So the 1963 Constitution transformed Nigeria from a monarchy. Don't forget, the Queen was still the head of government. So Nigeria transited from monarchical rulership under the British Crown to a republic within the Commonwealth. It officially ended the role of the British monarch and established the position of the president as the head of state of Nigeria. Now we had a federal structure establishing the federalism. The constitution maintained the federal system of government introduced under the Littleton Constitution with clear provisions of powers between the federal government and the regions. And then within the regions, the country was divided into 4 regions: the Northern, Western, Eastern, and Midwestern region, each with its own government, and considerable autonomy was granted to these regional governments. So you had the regional governments established under the 1963 Constitution. And then we had the presidential system with the executive branch, which of course had the president as the head of states and government, with significant executive powers vested in him. And the president was elected by an electoral college, which included representatives from the different regions. So that was how the president was elected. We had the prime minister, and the role of prime minister was abolished. So the president assumed both executive and ceremonial roles, which is why when you say the president is the commander-in-chief, he could assume the ceremonial role of the commander-in-chief by wearing full military regalia. You know, those are very ceremonial things. And so when you hear that the president is commander-in-chief, it is both as the head of government and the head of the security as well, which is the reason he could give such orders to our military and security institutions. There is a parliamentary system, which of course was established and so was also retained in the 1963 Constitution with 2 legislative chambers, the Senate and House of Rep, and of course we had the judiciary. Now, don't forget that even though we had Nigeria become a republic in 1963, we had military incursion into the governance of the country in 1966, when we had the coup, and then we also had the counter coup that followed. So we had military coups and had in 1966, and this of course impacts democratic governance. However, there were 3 constitutions that were midwifed by the military administrations. So we had military rule from 1966 all through that period down to 1979, when we had the Obasanjo administration hand over power to a civilian government after elections were conducted. Don't forget that Obasanjo became head of state when Murtala Ramat Mohammed was assassinated in a military coup. And don't also forget that we had Gowon, who was overthrown by, and then we had Murtala Mohammed take over. And then when Murtala Mohammed was assassinated, we had Obasanjo, who was the chief of staff, supreme headquarters at the time, and more like the second in command to him, assume office as the head of states, military head of state at the time. And the late Yaradua became the chief of staff, supreme headquarters to Obasanjo at the time. That is the senior Yaradua, not the one that became the president and who died in office in 2010. So there were a series of military rulers, but then under Obasanjo we had the Constituent Assembly, which of course midwife what we call the 1979 Constitution, and set forth a program to hand over power to civilian rule. And so in 1979, we had what we call the transition to civil rule, with intentions to restore restoration of democracy. So the 1979 Constitution, of course, facilitated Nigeria's return to civil rule after years of military dictatorship, establishing a framework for democratic governance. And if you look at 2, 3, 4, and 5, they were basically the same structures that were provided for in the 1963 Constitution. So basically, they were adopted. But let us look at some things that happened. We had the Constitution retained the federal structure of government, dividing powers between the federal government and the states. And then the number of states was increased from 12 to 19 in the 1979 Constitution, reflecting the need for more regional representation and administrative efficiency. So Nigeria had 19 states by the 1979. And then we had the executive branch, which of course was reintroduced. And then the president was both the head of state and government with full executive powers. President was elected directly by the people, no more through an electoral college. Remember, the 1963 Constitution provided for an electoral college for the election of the president, but as at by the 1979 Constitution abolished the electoral college and made it such that the people directly elect their leader. So the president was, elected through a popular vote for a term of 4 years. Of course, the bicameral legislature was retained, that is the Senate and the House of Representatives. And we had a total of, we had 3 senators from each state and 1 from the Federal Capital Territory, which was Lagos at the time, making a total of 95 senators. And then for the House of Reps, members were elected based on population with a fixed number of seats representing various constituencies. So those were the provisions of the 1979 Constitution. Of course, the federal and state courts were established in addition to kind of expanding the judiciary. Now, in returning to democracy, we've had additional constitutional developments that had taken place. Don't forget, Nigeria returned to civil governance in 1979, following the establishment of the 1979 Constitution. Elections were conducted, and we had Alhaji Shehu Shagari and Dr. Elias Ekwueme elected as president and vice president of Nigeria. And after their first term, they went in again for recontest for the elections, and those elections were observed to be marred by a lot of irregularities, and this prompted again another military intervention into the Second Republic. That period was regarded as the Second Republic because it was a second attempt at democratic governance. But that was truncated by the now late General Muhammadu Buhari at the time, who led a coup against the government of Alhaji Shehu Shagari and took over the reins of affairs. His government didn't also last because he was considered to be draconian in nature and dictatorial. And so he was overthrown by General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, who was then Chief of Army Staff. And in 1985, and Babangida became the head of state and government, and later transited to become a military president and ruled from 1985 to 1993. And so within this period, there were several attempts at, giving Nigeria a new constitution. So we had the 1989 constitution, which was, of course, not fully developed, and an attempt to transition to democratic governance. And then we had that happened. And then we also had the 1999 constitution, which came later. And that was given to us by General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who took over following the death of General Sani Abacha. So I'm not going into certain stories, as you can see, because I've talked about that history when we talked about political parties and structure. The blackout periods were period that the military took over the reins of affairs. Like I said, Babangida took over in 1985, just to refresh our memory a bit, and ruled in 1993 and conducted what we called the June 12th election of 1993, which he then annulled. So following the annulment, he stepped aside and established an interim national government headed by Chief Shonukan in 1993. That government was widely, criticized, and there were several litigations against the government because it was an aberration. It was not contemplated by the constitution that was in place at the time. And as a result of the several litigations against the Chief Shonukan's government, there was wide protestation across the country. Everywhere was in chaos. I mean, for those of us who were around at the time. And as a result of this, General Sani Abacha, who was the ranking military officer in that government, he was the Secretary of Defense at the time, staged a coup and took over from Shonukan and became the head of state. He ruled with decree down till 1998 when he passed on while in office. And following his demise, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, who was the chief of defense staff at the time, became the head of state, and again set the path for transition to democracy. But before then, he midwifed the 1999 constitution, which became the constitution we are using today and had been severally amended by the National Assembly and perhaps still undergoing some form of amendments to date. So, as you can see, there have been several attempts to give Nigeria a constitution. And today we have what we call the 1999 constitution, with some amendments that have been made to that constitution, which is the reason why it is often referred to as the 1999 constitution as amended, and is still undergoing amendment. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Nigeria's political history is replete with major constitutional developments, which we've all seen. And of course, we have ongoing challenges in terms of debates on federalism, resource control, and ethnic representation. So the issues of minority has not been fully resolved, as it were. The need for constitutional reforms to address national unity and democratic governance. If you look at the way Nigeria is today and some of the challenges the country is facing, it is the reason why a lot of people are asking for a national conference, even though Jonathan tried to give us one. But again, it was widely rebuffed. But we had very key issues that came up from the 2014 national conference that President Goodluck Jonathan, as he then was, gave to this country. And then the evolution of Nigeria's constitution, of course, reflects the complexities in our history and the diversity of the society that we have. So our diversity, the complexities of our own social milieu, is what actually gives birth and proposal for constitutional review, which Nigerians are yearning for, so that the issues of minority, the issues of representation in the National Assembly needs to be addressed, because there is the opinion that the National Assembly, as currently considered, is imbalanced. And so that has to be looked into, so that at the end of the day, we should have an egalitarian society. So those are my concluding remarks. And in terms of references, of course, these are some materials that have been used to develop this presentation. So ladies and gentlemen, that's Nigeria's checkered history of, constitutional development. And I hope that this has further enriched our understanding of where we are coming from, and having a clear understanding of where we are coming from should guide us to be able to navigate where we want to be. So thank you very much for your audience. I yield the floor to the moderator for comments and questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. That was a very lovely lecture, as we've been taking down memory lane, and I believe a lot of people have questions. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hands, and you can also drop them in the chat box and I'll read them out. So there is one hand raised. Mohammed, I've asked you to unmute. If you have a question, you can go ahead.
Good evening.
Read it now. Is Mohammed there?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening. Thank you
Please
for
go ahead. We can
the
hear you.
thank you for the
Good evening.
lesson. So while I listen to the lecture, so we really appreciate the our facilitator for today and the ECN. So we really appreciate. So I want to there is a misconception about the issue of this constitution that was given to us by this by the colonial master. So, but with this that we see, what with the explanation and the history that we just learned, so we observe that we later, as Nigerians, sat down and then be able to come up with something that will work for us. So, but I, there is something that I saw that maybe it was omitted. Like 1995, during the Abacha time, there was a constitution in 1995 that Abacha organized, so which was done by like 380 delegates. So at that time, so I think it was well represented. So and in 1998, the constitution that was organized by Abubakar Abdul Salam. So I thought this, because according to what I know about it, so they adopted those committee adopted the 1995 constitution that was organized by Abacha. So I want a clarification based on the that 1995 constitution and the 1998 that led to 1999 constitution, because 1995 constitution, so I there is that one, there was a lot of like Nigeria was well represented at that moment, because I with what I read, so Nigeria was well represented, and then it seems our opinion at that time was really put down, and that was the reason why, so they were able to adopt it in 1998, and it is the one that we are still using. They are trying to correct. So I want our facilitator to share more light on that two constitution. Thank you.
Yeah, your question is noted. Let's have more questions. So I'll just address everything at once.
All right, sir. Oluwatosin, I've asked you to unmute. You can ask your question now.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. To appreciate you for your lectures now. My question, I'll just go straight to it. I liked your definition by Professor Ben Nwagboeze for what a constitution is. He says of the people, and I want to stand on that. And I've noticed that in recent times that the country is going through a constitution. But the little thing I'm worried about is that I don't know if you maybe agree with my line of thought. I'm only worried that why the Senate is currently they had even done it. They have carried out consultation, but it was only done at the zonal level. I don't know if you agree with this my line of thought that if it's something that's supposed to be an act of the people, why should bring it down to even to the grassroots level rather than just doing it at the
You're breaking, Tosin. You take that again. We can't even hear you. I don't know if it's from my end. Moderator, can you hear him?
No, I think I've stopped hearing him now.
Okay, let's have another person. If Tosin comes back again, we can take his question.
All right. Mafeng Madiba, I've asked you to unmute. You can ask your question.
All right, good evening, sir. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, this is I'd appreciate first the speaker. This is one of the most enlightening classes I've had throughout this period. I would like to get the opinion of the facilitator. First, there's this norm, or rather, there's this burning question about when it comes to talking about the heroes of Africa and the part they play. When we talk about people that fought for the liberation of Africa, hardly do you hear um, most Nigerians being mentioned. Do you agree that we had more regional champions than national champions? Because from what you corroborated in some of the points that you made, it felt like we didn't have a national agenda of what we wanted to achieve collectively as a nation. And it also emphasized one thing from what I saw. We were actually doing better as regions rather than as a federating unit. Secondly, sir, the issue of this constitution, people have argued that this constitution does not serve the interest of Nigerians. And from the last, what the previous speaker said in his question, do you equally think that there's actually a problem with the people in power trying to, or creating an avenue for us to create a constitution that actually works for us? Thirdly, I'm from Plateau State, and being privileged to go through or visit the other geopolitical zones, I can say for a fact that Nigeria is actually too big for us to have one president at the center. And then so many things are happening within regions. There are places in Plateau State that I've gone particularly, or a lot. I've gone to some places a lot, and even our governor has not visited some of these places. But then all of these places are also under the influence or protection of the president. We see issues of killings that are happening today, tomorrow, and then maybe in weeks to come or months to come. And what is written in the constitution for the protection of lives and property does not translate into what our people are actually benefiting. So does that constitution actually protect our interests? Lastly, sir, the coalition, or rather the commission for minority tribes, I don't know if you can shed more light on it, because this entire process does not actually work for a lot of people in this country. I think I should be speaking in the minds of maybe some other people who are regarded as minorities in this entire project called Nigeria.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right.
Let me take this because they're quite broad questions. Maybe in addressing them, I might be able to address some other issues that some persons may have in mind. Let's start with the issue of minority. So we had first the amalgamation of the Protectorate of the North and Protectorate of the South to have what we call the Protectorate of Nigeria. So Nigeria became a country in 1914. And through the constitutional development that took place, we saw regions were created. We had the northern region, we have the eastern, and then we have the southern region, which were created. And subsequently, we had the Midwestern region, which was also created, and some other regions that were created. All of this creation of regions were basically to address the issues of minority and minority representation in the governance of our country. Subsequently, under the military rule, Nigeria went from those 5 regions to now having 12 states, what we call states. So from the regional governments, we have states as federating units. So you have 12 states, And subsequently in 1979, we had 19 states which were created in the 1979 Constitution. Now, from 19 states, we had more states created. So today, as of today, we had 36 states plus FCT. Do you know what informed the creation of these states? It is an attempt to address the issues of minority. And of course, you must have heard some months back, it was last year, where there were proposals for creation of more states by the National Assembly. That hasn't passed because a lot of people consider that they were just proposals. So all of this is basically to address the issues of, minority. And to go further was also the reasons why we have the local government, which is, of course, the lowest levels of government, which is more closer to the people at the grassroots level. It's basically for purpose of bringing more people into the governance of the affairs of the people. So that's why all of these creations were taking place. It is to address the question of minority. So your question around what has been done on the minority issue is actually this creation of regions and subsequently states that were created, and of course, the establishments of local government. So I hope that that is clarified. But I must tell you, it has not ended. So it hasn't. And that's the reason there's been agitations for a true national conference, basically to address that. Now, the creation of constitution doesn't seem to follow the people approach as defined by Professor Ben Wabueze. Yeah, and look, broadly speaking, the intention is to have the people design their constitution and reflect their wishes and aspirations on how they would love to be governed. But what we have seen is that, and the arguments have been made, that you cannot have a sovereign national conference convoked because you already have sovereignty which is vested in the elected representatives of the people. This being the argument. And so, to make it easy, was the reason why the term sovereign was removed and we had national conference. So, the whole idea of the national conference is to bring people together. And that was why we had the latest one, which was the 2014 national conference, which was convoked by, what's his name? President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. Okay. And you saw the way the people were selected from every part of the country, including interest groups, which were well represented in that conference. If you go look at the list of delegates to that conference, you see that it was really, really a reflection of different segments of our country. Yes, to the person who asked the first question about the Abacha conference, yes, which spanned between 1993 to 1995. Abacha did actually organize a national conference. Now, the intention was to actually give Nigeria a constitution, but some of the things that came up, recommendations that were coming in from that conference, clearly shows that the whole intention was how to legitimize himself as the president of Nigeria. So that the products of that conference did not come out as a constitution to Nigeria. That's why we don't reference it as a constitution, as opposed to what IBB did in 1989, okay, which was a constitution. But of course, we never really had a period that we could say that constitution, because designed in 1989, so the only time we had a civilian government, or we would have had a civilian government, was in 1993, because that constitution was enacted in 1989, but we still had Ibrahim Babangida as president. Don't forget, he was military president and he had a national assembly. It was the only military regime that had a national assembly. I hope you remember. And it was because of that 1989 constitution. So the current president, Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu. They were all senators um, under IBB. Umezoke, of course, they were all legislative members as a result of that 1989 constitution. That's why we could reference it. But that Third Republic was short-lived. The reason is because, you see, we had the elections that did not hold, the June 12 elections, which were annulled, and then we had a civilian administration under the leadership of Chief Ernest Shonukan, under what we call the Interim National Government, ING, which of course was not contemplated in the constitution of the country, the 1989 constitution, as it were. So Abacha took over, abolished that constitution, abolished democratic institutions and structures, and ruled by decree. And then when he died, then he convened the National Conference, but there was no constitution. There was a National Conference, no constitution. The same as Jonathan did in 2014, no constitution, but there was a National Conference, okay? And the product of that National Conference was actually to give birth to a constitution. But then that didn't happen because Jonathan left office and another government took over. But let's stay with what happened after Abacha died. General Abdulsalam Abubakar came into office and then midwifed the 1999 constitution, just like General Ibrahim Babangida did as military president to give us the 1989 constitution. I hope that clarifies the question the first person did ask. So that is exactly what happened. So we don't reference the Abacha era because it did not metamorphose into a constitution. It was a national conference, just like Jonathan did the 2014 national conference. Then the other point is, it seemed like the regions performed better than the center. And it seemed also that we don't seem to have national agenda. Look, in the 70s, I am aware that Nigeria used to have what we call the rolling plans. The rolling plans are like the national agenda for the country. It set forth what the government was going to do in a particular rolling plan, which could run from maybe 1975 to 1979. And we also had that in the early 80s. Okay, we had the rolling plans which continued. And we had also the Vision 2010. It's also a rolling plan, the Vision 2010. And then we had the needs strategy, which of course was put together by the government of Olusegun Obasanjo. We had the needs at the national, we have the seats at the state level. All of these are some sort of, rolling plan. Now, those rolling plans are no more in place. So it does seem like Nigeria doesn't have agenda. But what we have is what we call what the legislature called the medium-term expenditure frameworks. Okay, now these were basically fiscal policies, but I think what we need as a true national agenda is to have a national, ruling plan, which of course we've had before, like the Vision 2010, the needs strategy, and all of those that we've had in the past. So Nigeria have always had an agenda. Until recently, we don't seem to know exactly where we are because the leaders we have today are more concerned about the self-sustenance in power and seeking power for the purpose of, controlling power and controlling the resources of state, but not necessarily for purpose of, good governance. And of course, which of course is the reason for all of the agitations that we have today. The issue of national security is vested in the exclusive legislative schedule of the Constitution, which of course places security in the federal government. So the governors here are chief security officers in their states, but do not control the security paraphernalia in any way. And this, of course, is the reason why a lot of governors are coming together to create some sort of state institution that has some derive some powers from the Nigerian police to be able to police their states to prevent some of the security challenges that we're having today. But security is purely vested in the federal government, in the exclusive legislative list. So that needs to be clear. And I will encourage that we look at our constitution. Let's look at the schedules and, get to understand how the powers that are within the exclusive list, those are within the concurrence, where both the federal and the state can actually legislate, and those that fall within the residual list, where the state has full powers to legislate over. So I think those are some of the questions I could pick from. The last one was why. I'm not sure I got that so clear. On the matter of heroes of Africa, Nigeria is hardly mentioned. Look, I must tell you that Nigeria fought wars in the Congos. Nigeria fought wars in, southern part of Africa, down to even South Africa. Nigeria provided significant support to South Africa against the apartheid era. And all of this was because Africa is defined as Nigeria's centerpiece for its foreign policy. But look at the peace enthronement we have in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Sao Tome and Principe, and a lot of all the other African. Nigeria played a very, even in terms of stability of some of those countries, the Kingdom of Lesotho, Namibia, all of these places, we used to have Nigerian judges who preside over the judiciary in those countries. So growing up, I was very much aware of some of these countries that Nigerians actually hold sway and held the commanding reins of power in those states. But how have our leaders been able to articulate policies that favor the country, that empower Nigerians in these places to be able to sit in, especially if you look at what China, America, Russia is doing globally. Any country that they support, in fact, one of the things they get is to make sure that their companies come in here with their people to actually implement development projects, and that way they are able to empower their people and able to source resources from here to their own countries. But how have Nigerian leaders been able to do this, articulate a system whereby Nigerian can benefit from all of these countries that Nigeria have supported? That's a question that I cannot be able to answer, because we are all here now and we see how the country is being governed. So those are questions we need to throw to our government. That's why we need to hold these people to account, for their time in office. Moderator, I will yield the floor to you for any other questions or comments.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Olamide Ali, I've asked you to unmute. You can ask your question now. Is Olamide there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you very much for the lecture, sir. And thank you also, the moderator, for the opportunity given to me. My question is straight, sir, rather. We've been, linking the predicament of Nigerian with the adventure of the colonialism, that where we find ourselves right now is as a result of our colonial engagement and adventure. And also, our constitution is not original to us. And tracing the trajectory of how the constitution, was developed down to 1999 and several amendments, we still find some kind of loopholes and some kind of imprints of colonial culture there. So, sir, what can we do to just break away? Haven't we 1963 we had the republic, meaning that we have broken free from our colonial intervention. So, what can we do really to have our own true constitution, even institution that is not a reflection of colonial construct? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Ablamid, I've asked you to unmute. You can ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. Question is this: during the 1957 conference, it was mentioned that the Western and Eastern region will be granted autonomy immediately after the conference. So why was it that these regions were not granted autonomy, and later on they were granted autonomy collectively with the Northern region in 1960? Then another question is, which constitution granted, which constitution provided the provisions for creation of local government in Nigeria? So that's my two questions.
All right. Ambassador Sterling, you can ask your question. Ambassador Sterling, I've asked you to unmute. All right, I think he's not with us. So, Daniel, you can ask your question.
Good evening, sir. And thank you for such a splendid lecture. Please, my question is very simple and straight to the point. There's a certain expression I've always heard, and I just want to know the root of the expression post-independence. And it is calling those who colonized the space called Nigeria colonial masters. How did it originate? And why do we keep calling them colonial masters? I don't hear the Americans calling them their colonial masters, or the Indians for that matter, and several other colonized people by the same British. Thank you very much.
All right, to our last question for today. Joseph, you can ask.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for that awesome, brilliant lecture, sir. Thank you very much. So my question is, while you were talking about the evolution and the involvement of our constitutional developments, now at certain parts, at least I think from 1967, so you mentioned that, of course, we're a country of three regions when Nigeria gained independence, and then in 1963 when Nigeria became a republic. In addition, so a Midwestern region was created out of the formerly existing Western region. That's a country of four regions. Now, the order of state creation in Nigeria, what was the brain behind the order of state creation, aside the issue of the minority? Because by and large, I think I was looking at the whole thing and then I was looking at the dates for those creation. It started more or less like a short-term goal to really avert the consequence of the civil war when Ojukwu declared an independent Eastern region. And then, so out of that, Yakubu Gowon broke out 12 states out of the four regions. Was that the main reason why the order of state creation started? Thank you very much.
All right. Oyola, I've asked you to unmute.
All right, good evening. Thanks so much, everybody. The questions are segmented in like three. So the number one is let's imagine Nigeria had never been colonized. What kind of constitution would, on your own, like I need your suggestion now, what kind of constitution would you think could have been written for ourselves or could have worked for us better? That is one. And number two is which constitution between 1914 down to 1999, on your own opinion, do you think caused the most long-term impact, both negative and positive? And the final one is that, does Nigeria need a constitutional revolution or just a reform? Thank you.
All right, so let me start with the last so that whether Nigeria need a constitutional revolution or reform, well, I think it depends on where you are standing and what we understand by revolution. So we're talking, if you talk about constitutional revolution or constitutional reformation, some may interpret it to just mean the same thing. It's just a matter of semantics. Reform is to make new or to bring in new ideas, okay? To reform, to amend, all of that. So people will interpret that differently. Constitutional revolution is also here, perhaps the word revolt is basically the key word here. But more importantly, what will the revolution do? It's basically to better a new constitution. So if you look at the term constitutional revolution or constitutional reformation, so basically you're speaking to the same thing, because at the end of the day, all you want is a new product, whether by constitutional revolution or by reformation. You're looking at a new product. That's basically what you are targeting. So I don't think it's so much of a big difference. So let's not be, confused by the two words, constitutional revolution or constitutional reformation. But what is very important is for us to understand that the Constitution, recall when I was giving the background, has set certain frameworks, and it set the framework for its amendment and revision, which means that those processes for its amendment or its revision is vested in the legislature. So if you wish to make amendment to the Constitution, you need to approach the legislature, that is the National Assembly. Now, in approaching the National Assembly, because you are not a member of the National Assembly, you can articulate a memorandum and forward to your representative in the National Assembly, who will then present it as a private member, bill in the National Assembly. And that's the way that laws get bettered. I recall vividly our executive director here, when he was running for Senate, had articulated, I can't remember how many number of bills. I mean, he hasn't gone to the National Assembly, but he had a number of bills, which of course he shared with some of us, at the time. So many. This is the that's how you bet a working legislature. But I bet you if you go to most of these legislatures that we have today, none of them have any bill that they have thought about. All they wanted was to be elected to go to the National Assembly. What are you going there to do? That's why they completely have lost focus as to why they're in the National Assembly. And it's a challenge. It is a huge challenge. So if you want to propose a motion, an amendment to the Constitution, you have to approach your representative who will then articulate it and present it as a private member bill in the National Assembly. It doesn't end there. It therefore means that he's going to go round his colleagues to canvass for support for that to be even adopted via a motion on the floor of the House to be considered for deliberation. That is one. So the process of lawmaking is a very cumbersome process. So that's just something I wanted to clear with respect to between constitutional revolution and the constitutional reformation. Now, the other question of state creation, very important, very brilliant question. The issue of state creation, what informed it? Look, like I said earlier, the question of minority, even till date, has not been resolved. So, if the question of minority has not been resolved, then the promise of civil liberties, even as proposed in both the 1957 and 1958 conferences, cannot also be resolved completely. So for us to resolve those issues, and you see, all of the questions, the agitations we are having in the country today is the question of minority. People still believe that wealth is not evenly distributed. Resources are not evenly distributed to get to the people. In fact, recently we have the Northeast Development Commission created. We have the Southeast Development Commission created. We have the Southwest Development Commission created. So almost all the regions are now having development commissions created. What exactly is the whole essence of all of this? Is basically to bring the dividends of democracy down to the people to address the issues of minority. So yes, go on created two estates, and this was to enhance inclusion in governance, to enhance representation in governance, to widen the political space, to allow for participation of more people. And these creations were based on the complexities of our society at the time. What was the population of Nigeria when Gowon created 12 states? What was the population of Nigeria when Nigeria became 19 states? What was the population of Nigeria, or what is the population of Nigeria today? So the population of Nigeria has grown. We used to be 120 million, and then we grew to 200 million. Now we are talking in the region of 250 million. In fact, some people have it that Nigeria is more than 250 million people. So, and which is the reason why I stated earlier that there were proposals for creation of more states. I'm sure we heard this. Google it up, you'll see it. The number of states. It's much. It's more, but it's just a proposal that hasn't been passed. It's just proposal. So this National Assembly basically collated all of those proposals and put them together, but no discussion, no further actions have been taken with respect to that. So to your question, what fuels or drives state creation? It's expansion of the political space, the issue of inclusion, the issue of representation in governance. These are some of the reasons why state creation has become what it is today, to the extent that today we have 36 plus 1, and which so many are still considering that it is still not enough, that some states are actually due to be created from the existing states that we have. Now, the question of local government creation, of course, local government creation is a creation of the provisions of the Constitution. And if you go to the 1999 Constitution, you find it very clearly, where it is clearly stated that local government creation in Nigeria is as outlined in the 1999 Constitution. So, granting, of course, state houses of assembly the power to create new local government. But then, even when the state houses of assembly creates those local government, the National Assembly has to, adopt that and gazette and pass before it can be included into the Constitution, because the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, clearly defined the total number of local government, which is 774 local government in the 36 states plus FCT. So that's what we currently have. Lagos made an attempt before under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu when he was the governor of Lagos State. That was, that went as far as to the National Assembly. And but yet it didn't get, the nod of the National Assembly to be established. And so what Lagos did was to retain those created local government, because the Lagos State House of Assembly has passed the law establishing those local governments. So it's for the National Assembly to adopt it and gazette, and then it becomes part of the existing local government. So it was for that reason Lagos retained what you call the Local Council Development Area, LCDAs, in Lagos State. And that was what made the president at the time withheld local government from Lagos State, President Olusegun Obasanjo. You remember that the idea was that you cannot use the funds of existing local government and split them amongst the LCDs that were created. So if you're not going to abide by what the Constitution had provided for Lagos State, then the federal government will retain allocation to the state. And of course, which was done until late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua came on board and actually released those funds to Lagos State. So the creation of local government is as provided for in the Constitution, but the powers to do that is vested in the state houses of assembly, with concurrence to be given by the National Assembly. So that's the issue of local government. And then the issue of colonial masters. Well, I don't live in America. We see what they want us to see on televisions and read what they want us to read on the pages of papers. But of course, America has advanced its democracy. America has advanced its citizenry to a point where the level of discussion they are having today is no longer about colonial masters. So back then, they talk about colonial masters. You are talking about a democracy that is more than 200 years old, as opposed to our own democracy, which is just about how many years ago? So 60 something. So that is it. So America has advanced citizenship to a point that the level of discussions they have about development in America is not about colonial master. They've gone beyond that level. But if you look at the way Nigeria is being governed today, in fact, I've heard Nigerians who said they would prefer a situation where we'll be returned back to the colonial masters. so you can see where our level of discussion is as of today. So I guess that's the reason why we still talk about. If you look at certain actions taken by government today, it will clearly tell you that, look, it seems like someone is whispering what our leaders should do. And that's the reason why we keep talking about colonial masters. We were colonized by the British. America was also colonized by the British. But like I said, that's a democracy of more than 200 years. And they've advanced citizenship, they've advanced political discourse beyond the level where we are today. Today, they're doing development. They are not just talking about development, they are doing development. But we are talking about how do we guarantee development in Nigeria? Look at the way Nigeria is being governed today. How can you bet development? How can you expand development beyond where it is today? We have development indices that Nigeria is tracking. Meanwhile, the West and the other climes have advanced beyond that point. They clearly set the agenda for what development should be like. So what we call development indices is what these other climes are doing. So the global north countries are doing the developments and setting the parameters for development. We are copying those parameters and using them to track whether we are developing. Can you see the difference? So it's a mentality that we need to change. We need to rethink Nigeria. We need to advance our discourse beyond what it is today and begin to look at how can we actually advance democracy to a point where we talk about real development today, because we are not really talking about that, as it were. The key issues that we are talking about today are the issues of Senator Natasha and the Senate President. Those are the kind of issues we are talking about. The issues we are talking about today are the issues of coalition and APC. That's what we are talking about today. The issues we are talking about today is 2027. Those are the issues we are talking about. The issues we are discussing today are the issues of who is going to be delegate to the conventions that will happen. These are the issues we are talking about today. So you can imagine, base and very mundane things are the things we are talking about today. We are not really talking about democracy and development. That's not what we're talking about
So
today.
I've noted that there are some. Wait. Okay, I think it's my next. Sorry. What's going on? Oh, sorry about that. I think my network was fluctuating. I was not hearing you for a minute there. So there are some questions in the chat box, and there are three. I would read them out now, and maybe you can answer them. So for the first
I think we lost Mariam, so I'll just read out the questions. Okay, so Bolaji Daniel is asking, my question is, can you please elaborate on how, through Abdusalam, Nigerian military drafted the constitution? There are three, so let me just take the three of them. The second one is from Elijah Enoch. He's saying that how many pre-colonial constitution do we have, and how many post-colonial constitution, and why was it necessary to enact a new constitution instead of just editing the existing constitution, which is the 1960 constitution? And then the last question by Ernest, he's asking, in a comparative way, which of the constitution will be considered to have influenced the separation of powers that aligns with federalism? And has the military set the tone of governance in Nigeria? Will the story have been different if there were no military infusion? Did you get the question, sir? Hello, sir. Mr. Livinus, please, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm with you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute.
Okay, all right, sir, no problem. So those are the two questions.
Okay, so I would throw one of the questions back to the person who asked that question, because the person was in class, and I imagine that if the person was paying attention and following the presentation, he should be able to check the number of pre-colonial constitutions post-colonial constitutions that we've had. So I'll leave that to the person to answer that. Let's understand that facilitation or lecturing is basically, to me, as my lecturer once said, 20%, while 80% of which is to be researched by the students. So as students of the Electoral College, you have a duty and a responsibility to also research some of the things. We don't expect you to take what we are sharing with you, hook, line, and sinker. Basically, we want to spur you and inspire you to take action, because it is to the extent you are able to take action that you actually learn more. So I'll leave you to look at that. But let me deal with the issue of why are we not reviewing the older constitutions, of course, like that of 1960 or 1963. I must tell you, if you look at the key provisions of the 1960 Constitution, 1963, in fact, let's take from 1963 Constitution, you agree with me that even the Constituent Assembly that was established in 1979 to midwife the 1979 Constitution actually borrowed a lot of the elements in the 1963 Constitution. So clearly, there is a revision of that process. But then, there is a process for constitutional development. That process has to be followed. A Constituent Assembly has to be elected from the people. That Constituent Assembly then sits down and pool all of the materials that they have. Those reference materials will include previous constitutions, proclamations that have been made, judicial pronouncements, legislative draftings, and all of that. So all of these things are usually, put together. If you look at, for the lawyers will tell you, the precursors for development of a constitution include more than just what you're thinking. So nobody just sits down and brings things from his end. Yes, there may be proposals based on our where we come from, our nationalities and all of that, the complexities of our societies, but of course, a lot also come from previous documents that we have. So this is actually the process for enacting a new constitution. But then, let me go directly to the question you've asked, having provided that background. The General Sani Abacha Constitution, which of course, let me call it the 1999 Constitution. Again, do not forget, Ben Wabweze had provided, like we all established, the basis for how a constitution should actually evolve, for you to say, we the people actually did this. At no time did we do that. It was the military that put together a team. The military normally put together a team, the Attorney General and a couple of other people. It handpicks to sit down in one room and lock them up there. And, they come up, put together. And they normally, of course, will make reference to the old constitutions and then come up with something, and then they'll pass that by decree. That's why if you look at the 1999 Constitution, when it was first released before it became amended, it was a decree. I can't remember the exact decree that established the 1999 Constitution. That decree was signed by General Sani Abdulsalami Abubakar. That was the decree that gave birth to the 1999 Constitution. So what the National Assembly did upon proclaimed into existence by Chief Olusegun Obasanjo was to now take that decree provided constitution to now adopt it and pass it as an act of the National Assembly. It is at that point it became a quasi-people constitution, because the people of Nigeria surrendered part of their sovereignty to the National Assembly. And so as the representative of the people, they picked that constitution and then passed it as an act of the National Assembly. That is what gave birth to the 1999 Constitution. But pundits, scholars, and a lot of people have still maintained that that constitution is not a people's constitution, that we need to convoke a national conference or sovereign national conference to give the people a people constitution where people, so those were the attempts that were now made by the Goodluck Ebele Jonathan's administration, where we had the national conference to bring the people together to draft provisions that will eventually become the constitution of Nigeria. I hope this whole thing is clear. So perhaps maybe what we need to do is to further elaborate the processes for the enactment of a constitution, but I don't think that should actually take a separate course or subject of its own. So I'm glad that the question had come up, but basically understand that there is a process for the enactment of a constitution. I don't know if I've lost some of questions that you put forward, but I think I've tried to address the key questions that were asked by those persons. Over to you, moderator.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I think we have someone's hand up. That will be our last question for this evening. So I've asked you to unmute, Patrick. Please go ahead and ask your question. Please keep it brief.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hey, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. My question for the facilitator, I just have two questions. And the first one is, I'll try and be as brief as I can be. The first one is that talking about diversity management and trying to see how we can address minority issues and agitations and all that. We're talking about state creation. So my question is that, are there no other ways that we can use our constitution to see how we address some of these things without necessarily resorting to state creation? Because if you observe, let's say in the last couple of years, we've had situations where we've been complaining of viability of some states, so many states being unable to even do basic things like payment of salaries and things like that, because if, let's say, we want to use state creation to address minority agitation, we may end up having hundreds of states in this country, because even the current ones that are being proposed, people are even still agitating that, that there should be more, that they are not being carried along. Some people are even being afraid of the states they are likely going to find themselves in and all that. So what I'm trying to say is that, are there no other ways in which we can use our constitution to address some of these minority fears and minority, aspirations and all that, without necessarily resorting to state creation? That is one. And then secondly, talking about this same 1999 constitution that we're using till today, this constitution is a constitution that almost all Nigerians have agreed that this constitution is not the kind of constitution that we should have. Let me give you a very good example. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Debo Adesina, once described this constitution as a fraudulent document that lies against itself. That is one. Secondly, one-time Senate majority whip, Senator Olushola Adeyeye from one of these southwestern states, either Osun or So State, once raised this constitution on the floor of the Senate and said that this constitution cannot give Nigeria peace, it cannot give Nigeria development, it cannot give Nigeria security, it cannot give Nigeria progress, it cannot take Nigeria forward. This same constitution, this is a senator, then not just a senator, a ranking senator holding a principal office, saying this kind of thing. If we have agreed that then why is it so difficult for us? Why is it looking like rocket science for we to either throw away this constitution and get a new one, or amend it in such a way that it will cater for the needs of Nigeria, as cater for our modern day needs? That's what I'm trying to say. Why is it so difficult, and how do we overcome some of these challenges? Thank you.
All right, so let me start with the issue of minority. I see that that's a very topical subject because almost about the third person now to ask that question. I have said earlier that I agree that state creation may not necessarily be the basis to address the minority issue, and it is not. It is not. It is also the reason why government had established the Development Commission. Okay? And all of this is to bring development closer to the people. We have the Northeast Development Commission. We have the Southeast Development Commission. We have the Niger Delta Development Commission. All of these commissions, Southwest Development, all of these commissions are basically to bring development to the people and to address the issues of minority. And if you look at the manner of appointment of people into those commissions, board and all of that, it's to the extent that they represent or reflect the minorities in those regions. So these initiatives are basically to address the issues of minority. But let's even go this is the federal government. Let's go down to the state. I do not agree with you that the states have challenges with payment of salaries. I don't agree with you. Yes, the issue of viability of the state had one time toppled national discourse. And I must tell you, look, Nigeria is blessed. There is absolutely no state that does not have one mineral resource that it can develop. There's something we call principles of oh my God, that just skipped my head now. Comparative advantage. The principles of comparative advantage. It's an classical economic principle. What does it talk about? A state focuses on a particular produce or product for which it has comparative advantage over others. If you go to Benue State, it is food. That's why it is called the food basket of the nation. If you go to Zamfara, there is lead. Is it not in that same Zamfara that gold is being mined? How much of the gold that is mined in Zamfara goes into the federation account? These are questions we've not answered. If you go to other states, in fact, from the north central region up to most part of the north, they are sitting on some very important minerals. And some of you here know that. Down to Niger State here, we had the recent crisis in Niger State and what was fueling some of the insecurity we're having around there. Why? Gold, uranium, they are all here. They are all here. How are the states taking advantage of all of this? In Kogi State, there are salts, mineral salts that are in large deposits. That's why the Dangote established the cement industry in that place. In fact, we're hearing that there is a private airstrip in Kogi State. Is it a topical issue we are discussing today? No. What is the airstrip doing in the middle of Kogi State? Have we asked ourselves those questions? What is it picking from Kogi and taking outside of the country? And who are those behind it? We will not uncover. Look, let's stop deceiving ourselves. Every state had money, had resources to take care of salaries and more. What is happening to look at the allocation that goes to each of the states. What are the governors doing with them? How are we holding the governors accountable? That's what they are using to enrich themselves. And we are talking about salaries. Those are not my issues. They are not my issues as a person. Every state has much more than what it takes to pay federal allowance or federal salaries, if they manage the resources of their state judiciously, and if the people can hold these people to account. These are the issues we should be talking about, the issues around accountability, probity, fairness. So no one is holding them to account, and it seems as if the states do not have the resources. Who said that? I'm telling you today that there is no state that doesn't have more than enough to pay salaries and more. Every state here can pay a minimum wage that is on a conservative basis of 200,000. What is the state workforce that you can't pay 200,000? So please, let's not continue to take in this narrative. It's a deceptive narrative that the states do not have the resources. Let the states surrender all of the security vote that the governors are taking away, all of the resources that the governors are cutting away. Let them surrender them. Look at the number of convoy that the governors parade when they are driving. What are they parading those convoy for? Those monies can actually address this thing. And I don't want to mention it so that it doesn't seem like we're promoting certain individuals. We've seen people who had cut down on the number of convoy that they go around with when they were governors. So please, let's not be accepting this narrative of states do not have. States have enough resources. What are they doing with internally generated revenues? What are they doing with it? Those are enough to pay salaries. And then you now have federal allocation on top, plus top up extra crude account that is usually shared. So please, the argument that states do not have money is a big lie, a big fat lie. It's a deception. It's a deceptive narrative, and we must kill it. We should grow from this electoral college, knocking off those people, unlearning that narrative and holding our people to the governors and legislatures at the state level to account for the resources that have been placed in their custody. I don't know what other question again is there, but at least I've tried to address the issues of minorities and why state creation may not be the only way to address the issue of minorities. And I agree with that. I've talked about the development commissions that were created. Yes, those are one, but much more. We must begin to hold local government chairmen, state governors, and state House of Assembly members to account. We must begin to hold them to account so that the resources of this state can actually be deployed for the purpose for which they've been allocated. If I missed out of any, please kindly remind me so that I'll quickly address that.
Okay, no, I think you've touched on the questions that were raised. Thank you so much, sir. This has been so enlightening, so educative, so insightful. Thank you for always being there to share from your wealth of experience and your wealth of knowledge with our students. Thank you so much. We appreciate you on behalf of the college. This is saying a big thank you for taking from your time to be here this evening. I'm sure the student learned quite a lot. Thank you so much. So I'll just allow them to unmute themselves and say thank you before we end the class.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
We
sir.
appreciate
Thank
you.
you very much,
Excellent.
sir, for the enlightenment. We
My
appreciate you.
pleasure.
God bless you, sir.
I've done a
Thank you
very
so
good
much.
job.
Thank you so
God
much.
Thank you
bless
all.
you.
Thank you, sir.
God bless
Thank you
you
all. Have a good night.
and renew your energy.
Good night.
God bless you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you once again, sir. All right, everyone, have a good night and expect your assignment tomorrow. Have a lovely week ahead. Mr. Livinus, please, you could help us end the class. You have